So, as we continue following our two groups of characters through the House of the Crescent Sun, we've seen them arrive in the county. They've had their initial introductory adventure where they've recovered some relics. But both groups, who we're calling the Farmers and the Shadows, have dealt with this very differently. Now, they've got about 6 months of game time where they're going to start settling into the area. The first thing they have to do is speak to the Count. They have to talk to the Count who runs this county and get his permission to settle on his lands. While they're waiting for that audience, we've got a few things we can throw at them. Things that allow them to set up relationships within the county, things that are going to be important later. These are potential allies. They could just be friends. They could be love interest. Spoiler alert, this is Act 1. In Act 3, this whole city is going to potentially be destroyed. Everybody here's lives going to be at risk. Right? So getting some emotional connection between the players and the NPCs, between their characters and the NPCs, is kind of useful because it's going to make it more impactful when there's real peril later. So we've got a bunch of ways of doing this. We can have a banquet. The banquet is, there is a wedding that's been celebrated between one of the Count's main servants, his sort of chief administrator, his chief bureaucrat, and the daughter of a knight. And so there's a big feast. The players get shown a seating plan, and their characters are placed relative to their social standing. So most of the characters are down on the lower tables, and then at the far end of the hall there's the Count and all the bigwigs. So this makes visible to the characters and to the players the kind of social hierarchy and where they are in the pecking order. It also allows them to decide who they want to chat with, and they can have some fun. Some of them will be very direct about it and say what we want to achieve here, what's our objective. Our Shadows group, for example, Anna, the daughter of the knight and the sister of Wolfgang ex-Gerberton, who's a sort of knightly mage, she immediately looked for the person who she thought might make a good husband. Right? Now, we all know as players, and as the GM, she's not going to go off and get married, but her character thinks she does. She is at this point. So she starts looking for a match, which we know is never going to come to fruition, but it's good role-playing. Wolfgang himself kind of makes the classic player mistake of assuming that how important you are is really a question of how much physical force you can bring to bear. So he chooses the two most obvious soldiers on the table that he's on. He's on a table with other knights, so he's on a fairly high status table, and he goes for the ones with the military distinctions, right, with a record of military service. Now, as the campaign progresses, the players are all going to discover, and the Shadows group is going to get very good at this, they're all going to discover that actually raw power isn't enough, and influence and knowledge are also really important. But for now, he's being the standard player and going, who are the powerful people, who are the military people, I'll try and make friends with them. Our Farmers group viewed it much more socially. Guichard, the farmer who isn't a farmer and turns out to be remarkably well educated, strikes up an unlikely friendship with one of the Count's scribes. That'll be important later. Somebody's playing a guard called Lou, who's a 19-year-old kid who has too much to drink, doesn't really know how to handle it, and then decides that he's going to chat up anybody female anywhere near him. The first person he stumbles across is a 50-year-old woman who thinks it's really funny that this 19-year-old is flirting with her. And we have some fun with that, and it establishes some relationships. That's all great. We can also run some encounters around the city. So, for example, we can say the players are out in, or player characters are out in the marketplace, and somebody snatches a purse and makes a run for it. Do they want to chase the person down and bring them to justice? Do they want to chase them down and then corner them and say, you should be working for us, not doing that, etc., right? So they can react to that as they want. We've got a chase scene. They can get in a brawl in the market square where a wine cellar has set up some trestle tables and a makeshift inn for all the people who have come into the city for the market and for the fair. And this can turn into a bar brawl with some mercenaries. The Shadows group, for example, this meant that some mercenaries who they were going to be dealing with later they get in a bit of a brawl with early on. So we set up these relationships, and it doesn't have to be constant role playing. We can have a chase scene and we can have a bar brawl, but they get a sense of how the city works and they establish some friendships and so forth. Great. Then they have the audience. Now, we know as GMs at the end of this that what's going to happen is the players are going to have permission for their characters to set up at the ruins up in the north. Okay. The campaign kind of falls apart if the Count says no to them, but if they've really disgraced themselves, maybe they killed somebody in a bar brawl, then we're going to have to impose some restrictions on them. Maybe they have to make an oath of good behaviour or agree to pay a fine or suffer some sort of public humiliating punishment. But we're not going to kill them off at this point, right? But we can make life interesting for them. So, for example, the farmers, when they approach the Count, they're told that their leader should speak to the Count. Well, that's great, because whoever they choose, the Count and everybody in the city now thinks is their leader. Right, that's important. Even if they as players go, well, we're all equal, we'll all just work stuff out amongst ourselves. The fact that they've now got a public leader is important. Okay. So Guichard ex Bonasagus, our farmer, magical investigator, puts himself forward, and it's very much as we'd be terribly humble and grateful, my lord, if we could have a little bit of land. We want to rebuild the herb garden that used to grow at the ruins, and we'll do a little bit of farming and we won't be any trouble. Okay. Meanwhile, the Shadows, they've got Wolfgang ex Gerberton, and he puts on his finest robes and he casts upon himself a spell called Aura of Ennobled Presence, which means everybody turns and looks as he walks in, and he looks magnificent. It's a kind of mental effect that he's got. So he strides in looking awesome, and all heads turn, and he gives it the whole, I am a great knight, I am highly cultured, I'm a fine warrior, and I have decided that I would like to settle here on your lands. It's almost like he's doing him a favour. And we can have some fun with that. So in that case, the Count says, so you want to swear homage to me? Right. Now, player character does not want to swear homage to the Count. Right. So player character has to think fast, and it's, I am already pledged to the Order of Hermes, but I would be honoured to consider myself one of your tenants, and I would hope if ever you were in need, you would call upon me as a friend to help you, blah, blah, blah. So he kind of backpedals and he says, yes, I'll help you and I will be useful to you, but I won't swear homage. The other thing he said is he's just said Order of Hermes. He said he's a member of a bigger organisation, and anybody in the court who knows what that means has heard that. Whereas Guichard, our farmer, has just gone, oh, we're just humble farmers. So they set themselves up to be understood by the locals in a certain way. And we have some fun with the role-playing as they're doing it. So now our player characters head north to the ruins which will be their home. And they start investigating. Or they don't, as the case may be. Because each group approaches the question of investigation differently. This is supposedly their objective. Their objective is to come here, investigate these ruins, settle at it, work out how to exploit them, and then defend them. But our farmers just poke around the ruins a bit and go, well, it's got this nice herb garden. The waters seem to be magical. Presumably the waters are useful for the herbs in some way. We'll get the herb garden up and running again, and we'll just kind of see what happens. We'll see what sort of effects the waters have. Maybe we'll do a little bit of experimentation on the waters, and we'll just take it from there. The Shadows, completely different. They don't exactly map it out on a 10 by 10 grid, but they look at everything and go, okay, what's this? Let's investigate this. Let's have a look at this. We've got this big basin, this 5 metre long basin in the ground full of water, but it's half full of mud. We can't see if there's anything on the bottom. Maybe there's a hatch or a drain or something. Maybe something goes down there. Can we scoop out all the mud? Oh hell, there's something living in here. That's a bit scary. Do we want to kill it? No, it's not hurting us if we don't actually mess with it, if we leave it alone. Okay, maybe we don't need to know what's on the bottom of the pool. We'll come back to that later. The water seems to be coming out of what looks like a spring. Let's investigate it. Is there anything odd about that spring? Oh, this is a collapsed tunnel that's coming out of the hill that's feeding into this channel that goes down as far as the basin. That's not a spring at all. Right. First thing that needs to happen in August, somebody needs to get, before we get to the end of August, somebody needs to get a shovel and they need to start digging this out. Oh, it goes back a bit further than we thought. Right, let's get a spade and a pick and get a couple of people working on this. So they get really into it. Now, this then links to the idea of who is living at the settlement and what does the settlement look like. Now, the House of the Crescent Sun, the group, has a patron who has said, look, we'll pay for cottages and living expenses and we'll pay for your food. We'll also pay for 3 other things that you might want, which will help you. You decide what those are when you get there. So the players get to design their own settlement. And because, of course, you'll be investigating, you'll be settling here, you'll need some other people. There are going to be 12 people in total. Now, for our farmers, we've got 4 player characters. It's a sort of standard adventuring party thing, right? So each player has 1 character. It's Ars Magica, but they don't all want to play mages because the magic system's so complicated, they find it intimidating. So 2 of them are playing mages. So we have Guichard ex Bonasagus, and we now have Alicia ex Bonasagus who comes and joins him. So they have these 2 scholarly mages who are overseeing the investigation. And then they've got a woman called Adele who's very into archery and horse riding and so forth. And they've got Father Otto, their priest. The other 8 people in the settlement are whoever they want to hire. And they take a fairly conventional view to this. They go, well, we really want to build a sort of farming settlement here, don't we? Guichard, as a character, his main character driver is, I want to perfect farming. I want to have the finest farm ever, and I want to use magics to make it the best farm, and to work out how we can use magic for farming. That's his thing. So he immediately starts pushing for, one of these 3 things we have to have should definitely be like a home farm, and we want some animals that we can start breeding. Meanwhile, the woman who's really into archery and horsemanship goes, we have to have stables. And the priest goes, we have to have a chapel. And this place develops as a reflection of their characters. There isn't really a grand scheme of what will make us most powerful. Rather, this settlement becomes an extension of the characters because the most vocal member of the group wants to be a farmer, and because that character definitely wants horses, they end up with a farm and they end up with stables. And then they decide that they want like a barn, so they've got plenty of food supplies and they don't need to worry if there are problems in the area and they can't get food in and so forth. So they've basically just built a farm, haven't they? Right? They've built a home farm, a stables and a barn. That's who they are, they're farmers. Shadows go completely differently. Now the Shadows have gone more classic Ars Magica. You've got 4 mages and then 4 companions. So 2 of the mages were involved in the initial setup, now 2 more come and join them. And then they've got 4 other companions. That really only leaves them 4 minor hirelings. They decide that they want stables as well. So one of the hirelings has got to be a groom to look after the stables. One of the hirelings has got to be a cook. They want to get that herb garden up and running. So that's 3 of your hirelings straight there. So they haven't got a lot of flexibility beyond the player characters. But of course the player characters are fairly kick-ass. So each of them work out the sort of people that they want to hire and the sort of settlement that they want. Our farmers have got their farm, and the Shadows are sort of led by Wolfgang von Hornbach ex Jerberton, who sees himself as a sort of majorly knight. He wants a banqueting hall. He wants a great hall. The player playing his sister definitely wants a great hall because she wants to invite all of the locals round, not the peasants obviously, but the important people round, and they'll have lots of feasts. So they want a feasting hall. And they want stables. And then they decide they kind of want a wooden palisade wall. Well, they've just built a semi-fortified manor. Again, that reflects them. It's not necessarily the most logical thing for them to do, although it's a pretty good choice. But in both of these ways, the settlement becomes an extension of the characters. It sort of shows who they are and they're committed to it and they've made that decision about what they want. So they hire their hirelings, they have built these three key buildings around their settlement. And then they settle down for what are we going to be doing for autumn. So in August there was the fair in town. They got permission to settle here. Now they've built. The shadows have started digging that ditch. What are you going to do in autumn? And so everybody decides what they're going to do in autumn. And again, now we start seeing how different groups approach it very differently. Of course, the shadows have started digging out that trench. They want to find out where that magical water comes from. Fine. But they also then start looking at how they can extend their influence. They've got a banqueting hall, but they've got this knightly family, incredibly persuasive, incredibly perceptive young woman who is their diplomat. And she starts going out and she starts talking to their neighbours. They've already potentially got a good relationship with the Baron of Montrat to the north. So they invite him. He declines, but he sends his daughter, and they start a relationship with the daughter and the grandson and the people sort of associated with the Baron as a way of starting to influence him. They look to the castle to the west. The Baron there is absent, but his mother is kind of running it. So they invite her. And meanwhile, Anna, the diplomat, is going out and meeting the abbess at the nearest convent, heading up to Montrat to talk to the Baron so that she gets to talk to him directly and so forth. They've got a chirurgeon, a surgeon, but they haven't got anybody injured, so they send him down to the city for a whole season just to rent a room, hire himself out, maybe make a bit of money, but that will just go in living costs. Really, he's there as a spy because they want to get a sense of how the city works. They want somebody to live in the city for a season. And so what they've built is this manor house which has a banqueting hall at its centre, but then they start deliberately setting up these diplomatic relations and these overtures of friendship to all of their neighbours. The farmers, meanwhile, are taking it much more piecemeal. They're just going, oh, we've got a stable, and actually most of our guards can't ride, so we need to teach the guards to ride. We need to go out and explore that weird thing to the west called the Grandfather Oak. That sounds like that might be interesting from a sort of horticultural plant-based point of view. And yes, it was. They discovered that they can collect some stuff around there, some herbs which they couldn't get in their own herb garden. So they take a more earthy view of things. They send out their priest to just chat to the locals. Not the important people, not the aristocrats, but just to chat to the peasantry. And they start using their home farm as a way to set up, assistance for breeding exchange programs or whatever it would be. We've got this great ram. We'll rent out our ram to the locals for some sheep and we'll trade with them and we'll take some eggs and so on and so forth. And they're like really earthy. They're getting super into the farming. Hence, I chose the name Farmers for them. So their seasons start to unfold in a very different way. But during these first couple of seasons that they're there are also some set-piece encounters which allow them to learn more about the area, which allow them to make an impact, and which give them some interesting challenges and some fun encounters. So during this first couple of seasons, the autumn and the winter after they've arrived, there are a couple of set-piece encounters, or little mini stories which the player characters can get involved in. The first of those is a hunt. If they have anybody of any social standing at all, the Count invites them to join him on a hunt at one of his hunting lodges. So in that case, they get to, depending on their social standing, either get involved in the hunt and speak to some more of the local important people. They get the fun of the hunt itself. We set that up as a series of challenges. The campaign book explains how to run a hunt. And they get to pursue a stag through the woods, while the lowly status ones get to hang around back at the lodge, and something else happens back at the lodge. They've got an encounter for them to keep them interested. But as a result of all of this, we again get a sense of how they relate to the locals, and people start to get an opinion of them. So with the farmers, the only two who seemed socially superior enough to go on the hunt were Guichard, who is the main tenant, and Adele, the horsewoman. And she absolutely made sure that she was the one who single-handedly brought down the stag at the end of the hunt. The shadows approached it completely differently. They saw it almost like a sort of networking opportunity where when they went on the hunt, and it was Anna and Wolfgang, the two of knightly birth, they saw it as a cooperative, collaborative endeavour where they would help with the hunt. Right, so again, they're presenting themselves differently. Now, various little encounters during the hunt adventure, but the one where the two groups really stood apart from each other, and this is worth digging into because it shows how very differently different groups can approach the same problem, was when a group of mercenaries at the start of winter arrived in the valley and started impounding grain. So a bunch of mercenaries set up from Dosson. The harvest has not been great this year. Somebody decides that he's going to impress the Count by sending some soldiers to go and get some extra tax revenue, some extra grain. Like all of the peasants in the area are expected to give a proportion of their agricultural yield. Because the yield is low, therefore tax revenues are low. So this guy, Raymond de Alba, a very obnoxious young knight who's going to end up being one of the main bad guys, sends a group of mercenaries with some carts to make sure that the peasants pay what they withheld. In other words, extort some grain. The player characters have a young girl run in, help, our hamlet's being attacked, they've stolen a load of our grain, a couple of our sheep, etc., and they've taken my sister. It's a cheap shot, but as a GM it works. If your players are in any way decent human beings, you have a young woman kidnapped by obviously obnoxious mercenaries, and therefore she is in some jeopardy, they will go and help her. Right? If you've got players who don't want to help that young woman, you need to worry about your players. Obviously both of these groups immediately leap up and they go and help. This is where we get radically different approaches to the same problem. There's a bunch of mercenaries, they've loaded a load of grain and some farm animals and so forth onto some wagons, and they're starting to drive those back towards the city. And on one of the wagons is sitting this woman, who is the main objective for the player characters. That's what they've been specifically asked to deal with, is to get her back before the mercenaries do whatever the mercenaries are going to do. In both cases, the player characters send riders out, and they encounter these mercenaries trying to push their wagons through a ford. So this is now winter, freezing cold water. They're not going to enjoy coming out of the ford the other side because they're going to be soaking wet. The wagons are having trouble getting through because they're so heavily laden. What do? Our farmers line up on the bank, and they've got with them a guard who is an exceptional crossbowman, and they've got their archer woman who is a ridiculously good archer. And they basically go, you're going to give us the girl back. No particular preamble. The woman with the bow on the horse is not messing around. She's not letting one of the mages talk. You're going to give us that girl back. The mercenaries laugh about it. We want the players to hate them. Oh no, we're not giving up our entertainer. What do you mean entertainer? Oh, she'll sing for us tonight. At which point, woman with bow shoots the bloke who just spoke. Right? She's not having that. A fight starts instantly. I, as a GM, have messed up slightly, perhaps. I haven't given those mercenaries enough missile weapons. They are now clustered around their carts in the middle of the ford, and we've got expert crossbowmen, and we've got supernaturally good archer, has just stuck arrows in 3 of them, or whatever it is, within the first couple of combat rounds. These mercenaries are now hiding behind their carts. Their only missile troops have been wounded and can't really fight. The players can start, or player characters can start moving round the sides and start shooting at them from the sides. Yeah, those mercenaries are in a position where they're going to make a deal very fast. Maybe I didn't mess up. The players actually enjoyed, they got that satisfaction of, we deal with the obnoxious blokes, and now they're going to have to do what we tell them, which is to give the girl back. So the mercenaries give up the girl they've captured. They don't want to get shot anymore. And the players pretty well leave it there. They get the girl back, they reunite her with her family, they're really into the role-playing with that Hamlet, which as a GM I have to improvise because we haven't got a detailed Hamlet for this bunch of peasants. But they're really happy about this. As an afterthought, they think, oh, I wonder if the mercenaries should actually have been taking the grain in the first place. And they do send somebody down to the city to check. And it's a bit ambiguous. Probably the mercenaries shouldn't have been. But the farmers don't want to make a fuss. So they kind of let that one lie. They let that stand. The only thing they're really interested in is rescuing the girl. And then they leave it. Our shadows, on the other hand, totally different approach. So the shadows get to the bank, and it's Wolfgang, the knight, the mage knight, and 3 other characters. He takes the lead, and he looks at them and goes, "What are you lot doing?" And they say, "Oh, we've gathered this lot for our lord." It's like, "Well, what's the girl doing?" "Oh yeah, she's our entertainment," right? Same thing. He doesn't bat a hair. Bat a hair? He doesn't bat an eyelid, right? Doesn't turn a hair. And he goes, "Looks like you're having trouble," and says to a couple of his underlings, "Put your weapons down. Help them get the carts through the ford. That's the count's grain. We don't want to hold them up. Help them out." There's not a fight at all. As a GM, I'm going, what's going on? Right? All decent players immediately will help the woman in distress. No, they're going, oh, help them get the cart through the ford. But while this is happening, he goes, "You should let her go." And the mercenaries, same thing, "She'll sing for us tonight." No, you really should let her go. But he's making it as a statement. He's not giving them an order. And when they get to the other side, he looks at the girl and goes, "No, I think you're going to regret that." And they just leave. Now, back at the Covenant, I mentioned that they have 4 mages, and we've only met 2 of them so far. One of them is Vindisa ex Tremere, or Tremere, or however you want to pronounce it. And in Ars Magica, House Tremere is a very confident, autocratic, directed, hierarchical house. And she has been trained effectively as an avenger, not in the superhero sense, but somebody who takes revenge. And so what happens with the Carters? Wolfgang goes back, goes and finds her and goes, "There's a bunch of people, they've just pushed their way through the ford, they've stopped at the next farm along, they're trying to dry out their clothes because they're soaking, they've got a girl with them, they shouldn't. Get her back." And Vindisa is, "You want them dead?" It's like, ideally not. So she heads off. Now this is where a really focused Ars Magica mage becomes truly terrifying. Because pretty well everything that she does is around controlling bodies. In Ars Magica it's called Rego Corpus. So she can hold people stationary. She can make them float up in the air. She's got a few other useful things, like the ability to turn herself invisible. So what does she do? She heads to this farm where the mercenaries have commandeered a barn, and she turns herself invisible. She floats up onto a roof, watching them outside their barn. They've got a guard on duty, so she paralyses him. It's what's called a sun duration spell. This will last until sunrise. It's only an hour after sunset now. He's paralysed. His friends don't seem to notice, so she floats down, walks over and pushes him over. Right, this isn't a D&D invisibility spell. She can do whatever she wants and stay invisible. So inside the barn, these people just see their friend keel over. He's now just lying in the mud. She floats back up onto the roof, waits for him to come out. Paralyse that one. And paralyse that one. Now they're starting to freak out. A couple of them start running away. Paralyse that one. Paralyse that one. This is a one-person destruction of a mercenary group without hurting any of them. Just paralyses them one after a time. Ends up with 2 of them sheltering in the barn. They know something freaky's going on. They're shouting for somebody to reveal themselves. They're threatening to hurt the girl. She, now invisible, still, just floats down so she's got a clear view of them. Paralyses both of them. Stomps forward to the girl. Takes a knife out of one of their scabbards, cuts her bonds, and just whispers in her ear, "You're free, thank God." Right. Vindissa's very good at a lot of things, but she had an appalling communication role. It would have been cool if she'd had some one-liners, but it wouldn't have been in character, right? So the girl runs off. All of these mercenaries are now completely paralysed until dawn. She goes back, tells everybody else what they've done. Now Wolfgang turns up with a group of sort of guards, etc. Some of the more martial inhabitants of their settlement. Thought I'd make sure you're okay. Oh, what's happened to you? As if he didn't know. Has them all taken off to the local church. Right? Just drags them away. Take them to the church. Maybe that will help. Meanwhile, the player characters are spreading the rumour that this bunch of cruel mercenaries were going to violate this girl and they were struck down by God. Now, not everyone's going to believe that, but it creates a little bit of confusion. They then take the grain and they go, oh, this grain, this better be kept safe. They take it to one of the local barons' castles. They've been building up these good relationships, remember? They take it to Duquesa de Thouars. So they take it west. And then they go down to Dosson, to the city. And they say, oh, we've discovered this thing. There was this bunch of mercenaries who were going to violate this girl. But they had this grain with them. And we're not really sure who owns it. So we've got it in safekeeping. It's up at this castle at the moment. Who would know whether this was actually owned? And they get the Count's scribes involved. They don't ask Raymond de Alba, who sent the mercenaries to go and steal the stuff. They go and find the accountants, effectively. And in this sort of weird, bureaucratic, negotiating way, and of course Anna spends lots of time talking to people, they manage to get all of the grain sent back to the locals. But throughout this, they have not at any point made themselves seem hostile to anyone. Nobody can prove it was them that did anything to the mercenaries. Most people don't even suspect it. But they've got the girl free. They've definitely made an impact on those mercenaries, who were the same ones that they brawled with back at the fair. So there's a nice relationship of enemies starting to develop there. And they've resolved everything with this sort of mix of diplomatic deviousness, understated threats and apparent niceness, with some ridiculously well-considered spellcasting. Totally different way of dealing with it. So, those are some of the early encounters that they're dealing with, some of the early adventures and stories. And in the next video, we'll look at how this progresses through a bit more of Act 1 and how the two different groups manage to make some very different friendships and alliances and really change the way in which the direction of the campaign is going to move.